Speaksies.
So I don't go out too much. You know, we're still pandemic-y.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to be out. And frankly, this has been a great opportunity for me not to have to go anywhere, which
Yeah.
is really in my wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
But when I do go out, I keep thinking that I'm seeing my doctor
Oh, like
And it-
out and about?
out and about. And
Mhm.
it's not that I'm doing anything wrong when I see him.
Mm-hmm.
It's I keep thinking I'm seeing him in places, and it's making me where he is, what turns out not to be him, is making me very uncomfortable. For example, I kept running into him a gentleman that goes to our pool
Mm-hmm.
earlier this summer looked a lot like him. And that wasn't bad, but the guy was wearing like one of those baseball caps with like the flat brim.
Oh.
And that's something that I don't want my doctor to be doing.
Yeah. I know, I totally understand. It's almost like as a kid seeing your teacher or seeing someone else wear, and you're like, what are they doing? You
Yeah.
kind of like,
I thought they were just a teacher.
Yeah.
They were just kind of in
They
their
just
same
wait.
costume the whole time.
but even then, I remember seeing my teacher in places and they just had normal clothes on, but a flat hat brim for a
Yeah.
doctor is
And again,
concerning.
was not him. And then another time, I was at a convenience store and saw a guy come out of a gas station with one can of beer.
oh.
Not which is
Mhm.
always, I understand you're getting a 6-pack or maybe even a 40 ounce, but like the guy that comes out
the
with
scenario.
Yeah.
With one can of beer, I can't even, it's not good. That's not
it's
good.
not- especially when it's a Bud Light Lime, and then
Oh.
thinking that's my doctor. I don't want my doctor, frankly, being a Bud Light Lime guy,
No.
let alone being a 24-ounce can guy. You know what I mean? Even if it's a good beer. But then it really hit me why I've been freaking out.
Tell me.
So I've been married a long time. Not going to give the number away. I've already been scoffed at by guests when they've heard my true age.
Oh,
So I'm
that's
starting to
right.
get a little bit, trigger shy of giving that out.
Mm-hmm.
But I realize what it is so being married a long time, the number of people who have seen me naked, very, very short list. So
Very short.
But my very short in a myriad of ways. But my doctor is on that list.
Yes.
And I think that kind of, really for me, I think put it up to another level of
Yeah.
being frightened of
So
seeing,
really what you're saying is you don't want to have been seen naked by a guy in a flat brimmed hat that would drink a one can or buy one can of Bud
Yeah.
Light Lime. And that is maybe, you've said a lot of really smart things. That may be the most insightful thing you've ever said on this show. I completely agree.
And I think part of that too is with our recent Roadhouse episode,
Yeah.
realizing that one of the reasons that Kelly Lynch's character is probably the villain of the movie
Yeah.
is somebody who is a doctor should not be hanging out at places where there's, bar fights and a Bigfoot in the parking
Yeah.
lot. I mean, the movie should have ended right then
Yep.
when she pulled up and saw a Bigfoot and then did a U-turn. The credits should have shown up. That should have been the end of her,
Yeah.
end of the movie really right there.
I agree. No, that's very insightful, and we've come to expect that. And Steve, this has just occurred to me as
Yeah.
you've been talking about this. I think you should start maintaining a list, and maybe you can share this in a
Sure.
episode down the road. Maybe we can put it on our social media of just, I don't know if you'd call them trashy things or things that bother you or things. I mean, you could be as so you don't want to see your doctor
Right.
coming out. I think you could come up with a lot of those. You have in the past things like we talk about big bites. We talk about wearing sweatpants in public.
Right.
Generic oatmeal. You need to start compiling these and keeping them.
I think the problem with that is that list would be very long. I'm thinking
Yeah,
some sort of Old
that's right.
Testament scroll. But I will give you a short list. People have seen me naked in the last several decades. So
Speaking of scroll,
I'll give you it right now. My
Please.
wife,
mm-hmm,
my primary care doctor,
mm-hmm.
and my dermatologist.
Ah,
And my dermatologist's
Mhm.
assistant. I've added 25% to that list because my dermatologist is a female
mhm.
and she has as they should. There's somebody in there with us as you put on the kind of sandwich paper
Mhm.
robe, but that's a story for another day.
Oh yes,
So talk about a breakthrough I just had. I just realized
Please.
I've added another person who's seen me naked.
You just now,
And
in
I
this
have no
moment,
idea
realized.
who that is. Yeah, like I know who my primary care doctor is, and I know that the name of my dermatologist and my wife, all their names. But the other lady who's seen me naked, I don't know what her name is.
I always do find it interesting when you have to have an assistant with a female doctor in the room and it's another female. I don't know that I'd want it to be a man. The whole thing confuses me.
Yeah.
But, well, we've learned something already today. Thank you, Steve, and welcome. Yeah, and welcome to Origin of Speaksies. My name is Scott, and I've never seen my buddy Steve naked, but he's here with us on the show today.
Yeah.
So,
and the night's still young. I've just added, somebody else who's seen me naked. Maybe that list can continue to grow.
I know. So Steve, what are we talking about tonight?
Well, we are going to talk about the history of video games in general, but
so
specifically the history of one company, Nintendo, which has a very interesting story that I think everyone's going to enjoy. So the background of this really is our special guest tonight. We are going to be speaking with Billy Mitchell.
Yes.
A multiple Guinness World Record holder of video game records for Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. I first learned about him in one of my favorite documentaries of all time, King of Kong. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, we were going to interview him this year, one way or the other. Yeah. And then afterwards, I was going to build a show around it. So my initial thought was going to discuss the history of just Donkey Kong. Mm-hmm. But I very quickly found that everything I thought I knew was just folk etymology. So that fell away.
Okay.
But Billy Mitchell is someone that I find fascinating.
Yeah, I think you may have told me, if I may, you probably told me about this documentary. Actually, I think I remember you coming into work when we were working together saying, you need to watch this. And it made a big impact on me. It's definitely still one of my favorite documentaries. And I recently showed it to my son as well. And it really packs a punch. I got to tell you, I'm a little starstruck. I can't believe we're talking to Billy Mitchell. Yeah. This is really cool. He's a really interesting dude. And I can't wait to talk to him.
Yeah. So for anyone who hasn't seen the documentary King of Kong, Scott, how would you describe that?
So I describe it as sort of an underdog story. Mm-hmm. You've got a contestant. So there's a father who is, I believe, he's a teacher, and a guy named Steve Wiebe, and he is going to go for the high score of Donkey Kong to knock off Billy Mitchell, our guest tonight, for the top score. And so it's sort of, I would say, like I said, an underdog story. You get it more from the perspective of Steve Wiebe and how he's maybe having impediments put in his path as he's trying to get this record.
Right.
And ultimately, there's a little drama when he tries to get the record.
Right.
And then Billy is portrayed probably more as the villain of the story because he's the one that holds the record and as the villain who's maybe trying to hold down this upstart guy. So it's very compelling. You see, I mean, it's kind of emotional as you see this guy kind of putting his life on hold to try to get this record.
Right.
And then this guy, Billy Mitchell, who seems to be pulling out all the stops to stop him from getting the record. And the last thing I'll say, a great cast of characters, and probably the most fascinating one is Billy.
Yeah. So I guess we've seen the same movie. My kind of view of it is Billy Mitchell is a winner. He's a champion.
Yeah.
And there's all these people trying to get in his way and take him down. And, he's somebody that is going to be successful. And I think a part of my bias is, like Billy Mitchell, I am also a world record holder.
You are?
I am in the Guinness Book of World, or I participate in an event that is in the Guinness Book of World Records.
Wow.
The world's largest football game, largest attended football game. So I feel like we kind of have that bond too.
Yeah.
But I mean, Billy Mitchell, when I watch King of Kong, it reminds me a lot of one of my other favorite heroes from a documentary, the bear in Grizzly Man. The bear that...
The unsung hero that ate Timothy Treadwell.
Yeah, the real hero of the movie. So I think maybe that's a little bit of my affinity, but Billy Mitchell, winner. And I'm glad we get a chance to talk to him this evening.
Let's just say what it is. If you watch this documentary, if you've watched this before this episode, the takeaway from the movie really does sort of paint Billy in a not the best light. So, Steve, did you come across this take about Billy after you first saw it? Has it been something over time that you new stuff has come to light, or did you always kind of have a feeling that, hey, Why are they piling on this guy?
Well, in case you thought I was being facetious, Billy Mitchell actually in 2018 had all his world records stripped from him by Guinness. And he's a man that always has a plan. He fought back and actually had all his world records restored. So there are people
That's
out,
amazing.
you know, you're not paranoid if they're actually out to get you.
Very true.
So that's one of the reasons I wanted to speak with Billy, is to hear about how someone loses a world record and fights back to get it returned to him.
That's incredibly telling, because Guinness is very meticulous in how they, you know, before they put somebody in. So the fact that there were people that went to the lengths to have them removed, but then the fact that they got put back does show there are people after him, and ultimately he put things right. Last thing, I'm not going to promise it's the last thing. This documentary is incredible, and it wouldn't be what it is without Billy Mitchell. I mean, he's such a larger than life character in the movie itself. And like I think you said, Billy Mitchell always has a plan. And I think that's a quote from him from the movie, right?
Oh, Billy Mitchell always has a plan.
Good. Well, I'm excited to do that conversation, but I'm also excited to hear about the history of Nintendo, which, if you were to ask me, they came out in the 80s or maybe late 70s in Japan.
Yeah, actually, you nailed it. Nintendo did come out in the 80s.
Okay.
The 1880s.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the story of Nintendo goes back to 1889 Japan, and the story of video games goes along with Nintendo. But this story nearly ends in 1983. And I'm going to tell you how, for good or for ill, Nintendo helped save the video game industry in the mid-80s, which is now part of a global gaming market that will generate $159 billion in revenue in this year alone.
Wow. I bet the graphics in 1880 were terrible.
So before we go to the year 1889 when Nintendo was founded, I'm going to go back a few more years. Going to go back to 1633.
Whoa.
And before I go back to 1633, I want to give credit to an article, The History of Nintendo Video Games, by D.S. Cohen on LifeWire.com, which will get a lot of our history here on Nintendo, the company. So in the year 1633, Japan cut off relations with the Western world, and they also banned all foreign playing cards as they encouraged illegal gambling. Playing cards was extremely popular at the time, mostly because of gambling. So it wasn't long before the Japanese figured a way to create their own homegrown card games.
And that solved everything.
Yeah. Exactly. That always seems to work.
Yeah.
We'll ban alcohol, and no one will make gin in their own bathtub.
Exactly what I was thinking.
However, things didn't get that bad. Over the next few centuries, a new card game called Hanafuda was invented. It used images instead of numbers, so it couldn't be used for gambling. And that's when a young entrepreneur by the name of Fusajiro Yakamuchi comes on the scene. So in 1899, he opened the doors to his company, Nintendo Koppai, which manufactured Hanafuda cards made up of paintings on cards from the bark of a mulberry tree.
Wow.
He sold the cards at 2 stores. The quality of the art and design brought Hanafuda enormous popularity, and it helped establish Nintendo as the top game company in Japan. So you might ask what the name Nintendo means.
Yeah.
So there's no definitive origin of this, but it's commonly assumed to mean leave luck to heaven.
Wow. So, already learning stuff. I assumed the name Nintendo was somebody's last name.
Yeah. And it sounds like leave luck to heaven, too. It sounds like what probably that poor woman whose job is to be in there to see other random naked people at the dermatologist probably just has to say something like
That's
that
her motto.
to herself.
Mm-hmm.
So in the same year that Nintendo was founded, the Japanese government instituted a new constitution, the Meiji Constitution. These government changes led to a revision of numerous laws, including the ones that banned playing cards. So the Nintendo company was the most popular card company at the time, and was in a position to expand faster than all of its competitors, and became a very large gaming company. Obviously, at this time, not video games, but
basically they were skirting the law a little bit so there are no numbers on these cards. The quality is insanely good, and it's just pictures. And who knows what the actual gameplay was like, but there were games involved with these cards.
And they were perfectly positioned to take advantage of the market.
They took it inefficiency in the market and ran
Yeah.
with it. That's amazing.
And we'll actually see how this repeats itself in 1983.
Really?
After the great video game crash of 1983. We'll talk about that in just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So for many years, Nintendo was the dominant card company in Japan. But as things changed, for a company to stay in business, the industry changes and desires of the market change also. Where it got started in gaming cards, as things changed, Nintendo was starting to lose market share and lose productivity and kind of they were becoming obsolete.
Yeah, people were probably knocking them off, undercutting them, all that stuff.
And just again,
or just the market was changing.
Yeah, and over many years. So eventually they transitioned into a toy company. They released a toy that was very popular called the Ultra Hand. It was an extending arm that could be used to pick up things.
And that's ironically your doctor's nickname.
Yeah, it could be. Or it's definitely not mine. I'll tell you that. So, and this is now by the late 1960s, early 70s when this is happening. So about this time, the U.S. military has a project called Brown Box. Essentially was a video game console. It was taken by Magnavox and rebranded as the Magnavox Odyssey.
Okay.
So that starts in the United States, starts to be one of the first gaming systems that's available. There was a game on this Magnavox Odyssey that was an inspiration for a game that became known as Pong.
Okay.
That was created by the Atari system. So this is in the mid-'70s. Atari releases their first version of Pong, which I remember seeing as a kid, and it's amazing how things have evolved. But a Pong, for anyone who is not a ancient person like the two of us are, was basically a square of light that you could bounce back and forth. So about this time, Magnavox becomes the first video game system. Atari in 1977 releases their Atari 26. And video games as a home option becomes feasible for a while.
Yeah, but like you said, it was very rudimentary. Still pretty exciting. We had a Pong game and a light gun that you would try to shoot a white square that was bouncing around. It never really worked quite right, but it was there and it was still kind of seemed like, well, this is the height of how things are. Like, this is the coolest thing ever. It would never get better than this.
And also in 1977, a young, newly graduated art student by the name of Shigeru Miyamoto was hired as a staffed artist for Nintendo's planning department, as they were starting to get involved with video games and move into that era. So at the same time that we're seeing the first at-home video game systems that are frankly pretty non-exciting, there's blips moving across a television screen. At the same time, arcades were becoming popular. You would see better quality video games at arcades. And I mean, that was really my first introduction of being a younger kid and going in.
Absolutely.
And just the sounds and the colors. It's still...
The big cabinets.
Yeah, the giant cabinet games. There was a game that the Nintendo Corporation had called Radar Scope. It looked very promising based on pre-test. They manufactured a lot of them. But when it was released, it was a total flop. It was a disaster for the company. It forced an overstock of unwanted units and a potentially disastrous loss in inventory, as a lot of the overhead that went into a video game was the actual unit itself.
So this was going to go into this wouldn't be the 2600. This was a Nintendo system. Or was this a...
This is an arcade game.
This is an arcade game that Nintendo is making, not a home version. Got it.
So Nintendo's in a situation that they have this overstock of units. They need to do something with it. And Shigeru Miyamoto enters the scene again. So he is somebody that is described as a Japanese video game designer, producer, and game creator at Nintendo. He's the creator of some of the most acclaimed and best-selling franchises of all time, including Mario and The Legend of Zelda, and also a game called Donkey Kong. So using his talents for design, he was given the chance to develop a game using the Radar Scope engine and the tech, so they could basically revamp this.
Right.
And using this with a small budget, he created the game Donkey Kong.
Oh, cool. Okay. So he's the one that came up with like, let's put a princess in here. Let's have the barrels instead of just whatever the pixels were in the past.
So Radar Scope was essentially a Space Invaders knockoff.
Okay.
Which is a very rudimentary game where you shoot at stuff. So Donkey Kong, I think one of the reasons it resonates is that it's a story. Well, Miyamoto described it as the story is about Mario's pet, Donkey Kong, kidnapping and escaping with his girlfriend, whose name is Pauline.
Really?
Yes.
Didn't know that.
Quite simple. You have the damsel in distress. You have the monster. You have the Italian hero, who originally was named Jumpman and later was named Mario.
Well, it's funny you say that. There was back in the early 80s, there was a game called Jumpman that you could play on a computer game that was very similar in some ways to Donkey Kong. So my cousin had it and we used to play it all the time.
Yeah. So as we go on, I think there's something there that we'll talk about here. One of the reasons there was a great crash of video games in 1983.
Right.
So Donkey Kong becomes a massively popular game, and about this time caught the attention of a young man by the name of Billy Mitchell. So Billy Mitchell, on his first world record was in November 7th, 1982. We had the first registered highest score of 874,300 points. Later, Billy would cross 1 million points multiple times and also reach something called a kill screen on Donkey Kong.
It's very dramatic in the dock.
It is. It's very dramatic in the dock. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about Donkey Kong 2 was there's a folk etymology about the name. It's a name that sounds kind of awkward, Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
And I always believed the folk etymology I heard that it was a result of a mistranslation that was supposed to be called Monkey Kong and was then called Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to our old friends, Snopes.com, who basically debunk the story, talk a little bit about the history, and again touch on it's a game that again has all those kind of tropes that make sense. There's a monster, there's a damsel, there's someone that needs to be rescued. Yeah. Essentially what it comes down to is Donkey, they didn't, they want to hint at King Kong with it being the last name, and one of the things I learned is that turned into a lot of lawsuits throughout the years because it's not that much of a misdirection to surprise it.
Yeah, it's a big ape holding a blonde woman, right?
Yeah.
I think she's blonde.
So what it comes down to is Miyamoto, the game's inventor, has said repeatedly that he used the word donkey to convey a sense of stubbornness in the ape, which makes sense. But I always kind of like the thought that it would be mistranslated, that someone had messed up and meant to call it Monkey Kong and then Donkey Kong, because I don't know, for me that always sounded fun, that there was some sort of weird mistranslation as someone making a phone call and saying something, being misheard and getting into it.
Well, but I mean, and that happened a lot. I mean, down the road in video games, there are a ton of times where there are translations that didn't make sense or that were unintentionally comical, but apparently not this one. Or at least that's his story. But I believe him because he's a pretty meticulous guy.
Yeah, and he made Legend of Zelda. So he's got that going for him, too.
Yeah.
When would you do that? So, whereas games at arcades were doing well, the home console market in 1983 suddenly was not doing so well. And I've always heard of the video game crash of 1983. Speaking of folk etymology, there seems to be a lot of blame for an Atari game on E.T.
Yeah.
That's supposedly so horrible that it was just trashed, and there's a garbage dump somewhere that has a bunch of them. But what happened is you had mentioned playing a game called Jumpman that seemed to be a knockoff of it.
And not only that, I actually played Donkey Kong itself eventually on a Commodore 64. So, I mean, it was getting not only ripped off with Jumpman. I mean, I don't know if it was the official game or not, but I was playing Donkey Kong.
Right. And home computers were part of that. Yeah. I think the rise of that. But, sometimes, the press and the media are a little bit dramatic about things, and something's a crash and, it's overdone. In 1983, revenues were for video games, for home consoles, were about $3.2 billion.
Wow.
They then fell to around $100 million by 1985, a drop of almost 97%.
You can't blame all that on E.T.
Yeah.
That's pretty rough.
That is pretty rough.
Wow.
So what it came down to is that there was a large influx of video game consoles that all were not very good. And also low quality video games. So there was just a ton of consoles. The market was flooded with things.
Right.
Personal computers were starting to be a thing at the house. And as you mentioned, you played other games on there. Why do I need this other thing?
And to your point about quality, I mean, I remember having, like, you just never knew what you were going to get. Here's a floppy disk that supposedly has all these games on it. You put it in, it might work, it might not. Some of the games might work, some of them might not. And I certainly remember that.
Right. And one of the things that happened was there was no quality control of types of games. So that the market was flooded with games of varying quality. And again, the crash, I was amazed to see that happened. Video games to me almost seemed like something that were destined to happen. That like there was just a history of just a line slowly moving up as it went along.
But basically the dynamic was people weren't going to the arcades anymore because they could play at home, but then the quality on the home was so spotty, it just, the whole thing kind of went in the toilet.
So in the same way that Nintendo took advantage of the situation in Japan in the late 19th century with playing cards, they found a good way to buy low in the market and enter with their own personal console system. So what they did was they rebranded their systems known as Famicom in Japan as the Nintendo Entertainment System, and they intentionally designed it to look like an entertainment center component. It looked different.
Right.
The look of it with the box was made to be different than the normal console, the black piece of plastic that you jam something in.
Yeah.
And one of the things they also learned was to keep the quality of games high. I remember as a kid seeing the Nintendo seal of quality.
Yeah.
And thinking that was just a standard marketing thing.
Right.
But what they did is they limited the number of companies that could make games for their system.
Right.
And also developed a lockout chip that kept unlicensed games from working on the system.
Right.
So they basically controlled the market for quality. So at a time where video game consoles had collapsed and it looked like that would be something that wouldn't really resonate at home, for good or for ill, Nintendo came in and helped save that.
Well, and just a quick comment on Nintendo, they've continued to do that with the Wii, I think they have third-party developers now, but they're picky and the quality is still there, but that really does explain why that seal of quality was, but you did kind of know with Nintendo it was going to be good.
Right.
So,
and
cool.
and they still do it. So I checked to see how they're doing this year to make sure they're still doing okay.
Yeah.
They've been around since 1889. I think they're still doing all right. Their net sales are up an impressive 108%.
Wow.
From last year. So I think they're going to do okay. I think they're going to make it through. I think everyone being locked in at home and having to play video games is still a good option.
And they're always sort of like, you've got the other PlayStations and Xboxes, which are kind of going for a certain thing, fighting it out. But then Nintendo's just sort of in its own category. It's, I don't know, in a way it's almost like Apple. You've got all these PCs competing, but then there's just Apple with that brand, and there's going to be a certain quality. It's the same with Nintendo, I think so.
And they remind me a little bit also of another really good brand, Disney. Like with Nintendo, you're not worried about, when I hear that, it's kind of like I feel safe with my kid playing a Nintendo game. There's not as much of a worry about something that they shouldn't see that they're going to see with that.
Absolutely. I'm still stunned that Nintendo started all the way back with roots in the 1600s. That is crazy, but it's cool. I love it. The fact that they've been able to survive and been that well run over the years and adapted is pretty cool. Beard care is a passionate affair, and just like me, Viking Revolution takes that very seriously. Let's face it, your beard makes a statement, so make it a good one and embrace the Viking experience. From beard oils and balms, to combs and brushes, and of course, mustache wax, you'll find everything you need at VikingRevolution.com. Don't have a beard? I'm sorry to hear that. I bet you have a special beard in your life, though. Viking Revolution Premium Beard Care Products. You deserve the best, and so does your beard.
So I wanted to find a video game kind of term to use that, to discuss the etymology where it came from. And one I wanted to use was boss.
Yeah,
or
like
boss level.
Right, like you get to the final boss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or you have to beat the big boss. And I think it's something I feel like I hear outside of video games now, that it's something that people will compare that. In the same way that Donkey Kong kind of has some tropes of the knight, almost the knight in shining armor and the damsel in distress. Movies have the big bosses, but a Marvel movie, there's always going to be the final confrontation with the big, the evil villain that's stronger than everybody else.
Yeah, but do you also get it used in other ways, like you said, where somebody will say, "This is like the final boss of whatever," used out of context, like having nothing to do with video games. So it's kind of expanded beyond video games.
Right. So with video games, there's different levels to it. There's generally, I'm relying on Wikipedia here, and I don't feel bad about that because it's video games. So you have, the mini boss. You have somebody that's a villain or someone you have to beat to get to the next level that's stronger than the other guys around there, but not that big. There's a super boss. There's somebody, it goes up as the game goes on. And then the final antagonist that you'll battle is the final boss. So I wanted to do some research to see, what was the first one, and how was the term coined also. So to look back at some of the more memorable bosses, according to Polygon.com, we're going to also see where this was first used. So I've seen this in a couple places, and the first boss is associated with a video game called D&D. Now it sounds like I'm saying Dungeons and Dragons, but the game is actually the letters D, N, and D.
Okay.
And from the Polygon article, in 1975, D&D on the Plato system presented players with the industry's first boss encounter, the Golden Dragon.
Cool.
The game was a text adventure with only a little bit of animation, and the boss was designed specifically to prevent players from progressing through the game with ease.
Right, so more quarters.
Yeah. Or in that case, I think was something like that. That sounds like that was on could have been a Radio Shack Tandy.
But either way, it was replayable. It took longer to get through. It makes total sense.
So tying back to Nintendo, one of the examples they also give is Mike Tyson and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out.
Yeah, I never got to Tyson, man. I was not good enough.
I don't think I've ever gotten the end of anything. Yeah. Now that I actually say it out loud. I like video games, but one of the reasons I don't use video games is because I like them. That was something I made a decision years ago to be a productive citizen, is I can't have video game systems in my house because they hook into my head. And I always find ways around that. I will give a shout out to you. You'd recently mentioned the Netflix show Queen's Gambit. Yeah. Which I thought was another kind of royal show on Netflix. But it's actually about chess. And I found several free online ways to play chess. And I now have a new way to, disappear for 35 to 40 minutes.
Yeah, but that's classy. That's chess.
It is classy.
It's not Candy Crush. And hey, maybe this is a good time. I was going to throw this in before the end of the show, but let's do it now. So you mentioned that you probably never beat anything, and you've kind of kept yourself away from it. But what about, we can't do a video game episode without talking about this. Did you have a game as a kid at any point that you really just fell in love with, or that you really love to play, that you're kind of nostalgic about?
I would have to say it was the Nintendo game Bases Loaded.
Yeah.
That I loved baseball. I loved video games. It was a great combination. It was one of the better video games that actually the gameplay on it was good. Because I remember there are other baseball games that you would get that you would find some weird hitch in the system. Like if you hit the ball to the left side of the field, everything was a hit. Things like that. Bases
Loaded was awesome, and no pressure. It's been a long time, but do you remember who your team was? Do you remember your favorite team?
It was the New York team, and I can't remember. Did they have a team name?
No, it was just just New York. So I remember, I think my team was Utah because they had Agua.
Oh yeah,
and that guy was awesome. And then I don't remember who had New York. Might have had Paste. I don't know, Payson Bay.
Payson Bay? Yeah. Was that New York or was that New Jersey?
That was New Jersey.
New Jersey.
So I don't remember who New York had, though.
I can't remember either, but I played that game so much that I made my own lineups. That I started benching certain players.
That's amazing.
And yeah, it was a lot of...
It's been years. And actually, that was what I was fishing for. I had a feeling it was Bases Loaded. But I never won a full season because that was hardcore. I mean, you had to keep a code, write it down, and actually do 162 games. Yeah. But I think you said you did, right?
You weren't outside doing things, or at my age, being near women, which again probably goes to help. One of the ways that list is throughout the years is very short of Who's Seen Me Naked.
Yeah. Do you remember we'll move on, do you remember the umpires' names?
I don't. Do you?
Yuck, Dumb, Boo, and Bum.
Man.
And I remember that because I thought it was hilarious that this Japanese company had done that, because everybody hates the umpires. Yuck, Dumb, Boo, Bum. Every game, it was Yuck, Dumb, Boo, Bum. Yuck, Y-U-K. Anyway, so yeah, Bases Loaded was awesome. So I would actually say that was probably one of mine too.
So doing some more research on who the first real boss was. So obviously we've seen where it started with the D&D game and some examples. But at Geek Insider, and I'm going to trust Geek Insider to talk about who the first real boss was.
Yeah.
In their research, they believe the first real instance of bosses was in the original Metroid, which was released in 1986. So we kind of agree on where the concept comes from. You see it, in games throughout when games started. But where was the term first used? So I wanted to ask Barry Popick. I thought about reaching out to him for this.
Yeah.
And then I felt embarrassed about having to bring up video games with Barry Popick.
That might be the thing where he goes, what, screw these guys.
Yeah, I imagine that, I respect him for, if he didn't have respect for us, I would respect that.
Yeah.
So a couple resources pointed back to the #1 issue of the magazine Nintendo Power from 1988.
Love it.
Several citations for the term boss. One quote is, "No matter how many times I try, I can't seem to beat the 5 boss characters." So I wasn't able to actually find a copy of that to verify that it's true. So that, there could be some folk etymology with this, but it makes sense.
It makes sense. And, when you said you were going to do boss, I was kind of like, boss, that's just is what it is. But then you're like, well, wait a minute though. Why are they called bosses? They could be called, anything else, monsters or, I don't know what you would call them. I guess it just landed on boss. I was wondering if it had anything to do with the mafia or the mob or something. You get a boss, maybe there was some game, but I don't recall any game about the mafia.
But I think it's also something too, just in kind of, as you talk to people, you kind of refer to people as the boss. That guy's the boss. There's Boss Hog. There's things like that are kind of your boss, the person that's over you that you have to get past.
That would be a good game if you had to fight Boss Hog. I love
I really wish it came back to Boss Hog, but I'll give him a little bit of credit of, I think, adding to that story, being
his legacy,
yes. Adding to the majesty of that term.
I'm down with that, even if it's not true.
But most importantly, and even if it's not true, it ties back into Nintendo. So I think I'm gonna stick with it just out of pure selfishness.
Oh, the Nintendo Power thing.
Yeah, Nintendo Power. So was that? I remember that magazine, and I remember almost kind of drawing a line of I really like video games, but video game magazines maybe is a bridge too far. Was that ever something you got into?
Well, my relationship with Nintendo Power, it was one of those things I never actually got the magazine, and frankly, I would have loved to have gotten it. So it wasn't anything about willpower of I don't want to cross the line.
Right.
I was hook, line, and sinker for video games, but it was so much different. You mentioned Bases Loaded earlier, and it just goes to show the difference in time periods. I ordered that. That was my first Nintendo game I got. That wasn't like Super Mario Brothers, which came with Nintendo.
Right.
And by the way, I got a Nintendo 2 years after they're out, which a lot of my friends already had it. Anyway, I got it from some mail-in thing. I remember filling out a form. My parents, let me get it, and just waiting for the UPS man to come for months.
Right.
Months. And I'd go stand outside in the court. I knew he came around 2:00 and he'd drive on by. Eventually that thing came. But think about that.
That is
months later. I mean, it was, I just kept thinking today might be the day I get Bases Loaded.
And there was no tracking. There was no system to see
you
where
just
it came from.
Had faith that it would come, and it eventually did.
Yeah.
Nintendo Power to me was and I don't think kids today, and I will say it, I don't think kids really understand the feeling of, there's a magazine called Nintendo Power. Maybe somebody's brought it into school. Maybe you've seen it. I don't really know how I would even get my hands on it. Do you know what I mean? Where do I go to subscribe to this? Who pays for it? How does that work? I don't know how any of this works. So I got my hands on a couple through friends, and it was just this thing that was there that was so cool that you could actually find out where there are hidden things. There was no internet. I think right now I'd get Nintendo. I should just I should go see if it's still out. Actually, no, that would be crossing a line as a 42-year-old. But, you mentioned I did the same thing. I didn't have a gaming system. The last one I had was a PlayStation 2. I gave it to my nephew and I said, I'm an adult now. But then Nintendo, speaking of, brought me back in with the Wii.
Yes.
Because I said, this is something, as you mentioned earlier, I can play with my kids. And I have wonderful memories of my kids and you don't feel guilty. You're like, hey, we can stand here and do bowling with TV. That feels wholesome. We're doing it as a family. It's nothing bad's going to happen, like you said before.
Right.
Unfortunately, I eventually, as my son got older, was like, okay, we'll get a PlayStation, and kind of dipped our toes, and then he became into Fortnite, and the ball rolled from there. So very long answer to your story. I have a complicated history with video games, but I try not to spend too much time on them.
And speaking of someone who has a complicated history with video games,
nice.
Time for our interview with Billy Mitchell. This is Robert Bankett, host of True Facts with Robert Bankett. True fact, the tallest building in the Kingdom of the Netherlands is the Euromast, an observation tower in Rotterdam. Also, I have carnal knowledge of T. Hollis Mellencamp's mother. Our guest is a competitive video game pioneer whose records include the first person to score over 1 million on Donkey Kong and also holding the highest Donkey Kong score 4 times. In April 2018, these records were taken away by the Guinness Book of World Records. In June 2020, Guinness reinstated these records after a, quote, re-examination of the records in question and the emergence of key eyewitnesses and expert testimonials, including a 156-page evidence package, which, by the way, I have read. First learned about him when I watched the documentary King of Kong, where he became my favorite documentary hero, second only to the Bear and Grizzly Man. Video game player of the century, competitive gaming ambassador, and a man who always has a plan. Billy Mitchell. Billy, welcome to Origin of Species.
I appreciate it very, very much, Steve. I appreciate you being here, you and Scott. And my son doesn't recommend too many people. Matter of fact, he doesn't recommend anybody. So either you guys gave a good impression or it's a case of mistaken identity. But either way, we're here.
Cool. We'll make some good memories one way or the other with that. So in my intro, I was going to mention your 2 perfect Pac-Man scores, but you recently achieved a score that was beyond perfect.
Sure. Well, first of all, I've achieved far more than 2 perfect scores, but that's okay. They always say that it's the first one that makes the difference. That was a catapult that really lit up the world. That's what sent me to several continents. That's what sent me to Tokyo. That's what created a personal relationship between myself, Masaya Nakamura, the founder CEO of Namco, the guy they call the father of video games. Also Professor Ayatwani, who is the designer, both of which are just Class A gentlemen, and that relationship that's gone on with Namco all these years is absolutely priceless. We can get back to that at another time, but what happened was the year was 2005, and I had 2 prominent retro gamers, names that would be recognized by people in the retro community, who were visiting, one that's reasonably local and the other one who was from out of state. And we were just in the back of one of the restaurants, and we were playing We were playing. We were playing Pac-Man on the anniversary edition, and we were at the split screen, and we were looking and trying different things, or actually I was. And I knew that I had eaten all 9 of the mystery dots, and I was running around trying some other things, and suddenly we heard chomp, and all of a sudden everybody snapped to attention like we saw a snake or something. And I realized that I had come across something that had never been seen before. And it was just the 3 of us there. We realized that there was an extra dot, a 10th dot, and we just sort of kept it to ourselves for many years. We actually didn't speak of it. 10 years later, at an event one of the other guys was at, he mentioned how I had played and how I had found that additional dot, which everybody got all excited and said, "Oh, not everybody, a couple of people got all excited. Oh, now I'm going to play. Oh, I can beat Billy's score. Oh, I'll be the guy to beat the perfect score."
Mhm.
And they tried for a long time. It's difficult. Basically, it's settled down for a bit. And I had always planned on doing it. And I had coordinated with Namco to do it in May of this year for Pac-Man's, 40th anniversary. But the Namco flagship arcade that they have in Chicago, where they also have the museum, it was closed because of the pandemic. So that was the end of that idea. It was pushed back. They later scheduled the party a couple of months further. They were thinking, as I guess we all were hoping, that things would die down, and they didn't. And they pushed it back indefinitely. They didn't know from day to day if they would be open. And of course, right now they're closed because of the pandemic.
Right.
So then we switched down to Galloping Ghost Arcade, which has a scoreboard that is respected and recognized by Guinness called Arcade. And Galloping Ghost is very friendly with Namco. And so we brought the event to Galloping Ghost, and Namco came down to visit and see the event, basically authenticate what was going on. That was the hand that Guinness would like to be in there. And so the three credible authorities are Guinness, Namco, and Arcade. It's owned by Galloping Ghost. Well, I was playing, and it was far more difficult than I thought. It was a tremendous adjustment to the new version, but I knew what I had to learn or relearn I would eventually do, and I just persistently kept at it. And what it comes down to is you do a perfect score all the way to the end, and instead of getting 9 dots on the mystery side, you get 10 dots. And you might say, 1 dot? Well, what kind of big deal is that? Well, for each man you get 1 dot. Your guy dies. You play again, you get 10 dots, 1 additional dot, he dies. You do that 6 times. So you get a total of 60 points. But those 6 dots you eat are enough dots to force out the second key, which means you get 5,060 points more. But it was awesome because not only do you have the hundreds of people that are watching as you play, you have the horde of people that are standing behind you. You have the presence of the people that are respected within the industry of scorekeeping. But it gives you a level of satisfaction because you kind of put the baton down and you have nothing left you have to do.
Right.
You don't have to do it again. You don't go to the moon twice. You don't fly across the Atlantic twice. And I know I keep saying that, but damn it, I keep finding extra things to do or things to pioneer or things. And to be honest, I already have another one here that who knows, maybe in a month or two, I'll be able to tell you about.
All right, good.
That's exciting.
But that was it. And there was a handful of, trusted friends who were, watching and supporting. And so what were we going to call it? Perfect Pac-Man? No, we just called it Beyond Perfect Pac-Man. It's an additional achievement on an additional track. And I believe that's the way that Guinness wants to celebrate it, but that's their decision.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. We knew that you were doing something and that you were trying for something new, and it's awesome. So congrats.
Because we've been conversing or emailing back and forth.
That's right. And your son gave me my new excuse. Next time I need to get out of something, I'm going to say I'm unavailable. I'm working on a world record Pac-Man score.
Yeah. They won't believe you, but that's okay.
So speaking of Guinness, couple years ago, they announced they wiped out all your achievements, the Pac-Man, the Donkey Kong, everything. When they did that, what was your reaction? And tell me just about the fight to get your records restored. How does that work?
Well, the events that preceded that were not a shock. I could see that clearly coming. I could see an agenda there. The idea that the next day somebody at Guinness announced that they were following suit. Yes, that was a shock. That was not somebody out of their corporate office. And I scratched my head. And believe me, of all people you'll know, I know and understand delayed gratification. So I had already, prior to all that, formulated in my mind the arduous task that I would have to go through because we were looking back on things from 2018 all the way back to 1982. That was an absolute monstrous undertaking to go back to those events,
Right.
the people, the involvement, the setup, that which was there. I had to put something together that had hardcore evidence and not pseudoscience. And I knew that it would be time consuming. I knew absolutely that it would be conclusive. It's just to say that it's aggravating is an understatement. I see this stuff happen on TV.
Mm-hmm.
It all happens in 1 hour.
Yeah.
Nothing. It would go weeks and weeks, even in between phone calls. But from the time that we first approached those who were necessary at Guinness and we sent it to them, from that point, I felt quite confident because they were completely professional. We said, well, here's this, here's that, here's everything. We'd like to hear back from you in 2 weeks. They said, okay, we'll have to examine it all.
Mm-hmm.
They did. When they said they were going to be back in 2 weeks, they did. When they said 3 weeks, they did. When they said 1 week, they did. Even if they hadn't researched something thoroughly enough, then they would contact back and say, we need another week in this area. And it went back and forth for a period of months where they had questions. And again, you gain a level of satisfaction because you can tell from their questions, you can tell the tremendous research they're putting into it. I'm being honest, research that I didn't necessarily think they would do to the depths that they did, the contacts they would make. So as time went on, although I certainly got more frustrated because of time and because I've bitten my tongue all of those months, over a year, I didn't allow myself to come out of character. I didn't allow anybody to change my personality because of what they did.
Well, you talked about delayed gratification, and I wonder, as you said, I mean, they did so much research. Is it almost more gratifying, although it, I'm sure, was disappointing to get the initial, news about things being revoked? Once it's gone through that rigorous examination and been reversed, it's almost, was it even more gratifying to say, okay, they've done this whole thing and now everything stands?
Well, that's a really good statement. And few people have asked me that in that way. And the reason why I bring that up is because to understand how correct you are, to think that they went back and they did research over all this time and they, as I call it, a re-solidified history. Yes, that was tremendously satisfying. But during the time period where I honestly thought, well, am I just going to sit on my hands here? I mean, I hadn't played competitively in about 8 years. And it was my son who said, I'm going to set up Twitch here and we're going to start playing. I says, I ain't playing that. And he's 22. I can't push him around anymore. And he goes, yes, we are. He goes, I'm going to set it up. And I go, good, you set it up, you play. I'm not doing that. But he set it up in the summer of 2018. And, he's home from school and he's my son and I like spending time with him. He's playing. It's okay. So I went over and I played and it was fun. Mm-hmm. And then scores started to climb. And within a month of doing it, the so-called 1,000,000 points in Donkey Kong, I hit it 3 times in 1 week. Mm-hmm. And then it just came to my head that it should have come a long time ago. And that was, all I got to do is go back and repeat these scores. I mean, that would be credibility for, most people, not for a hardcore detractor, and so then that became the goal. Then I would go to the various events like the one we were talking about with Pac-Man or when I went to the Donkey Kong World Championship and I would go and I would win. And if I come in first place, well, that would solidify a strong level. So when the Guinness story concluded, when they actually came to their conclusion, when they gave all the good news that we're talking about, I had already re-solidified all those positions. And I'm just being honest with you here. I hadn't played Pac-Man seriously for, I don't want to say 2 decades, so we'll say more than a decade. I hadn't played Donkey Kong serious in about 8 years. And I really did. I said to myself, I said, geez, can I really do this? I mean, I actually questioned myself. So I have a lot of satisfaction knowing that I could, but I found myself in the same position that I always put myself in, and that was to put myself under a tremendous amount of pressure. Mm-hmm. Because I seemed to do well. In 2000, it was in 1999, I did the first perfect score at Fun Spot in Laconia, New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. So I went back to Fun Spot and a couple months early, and I said hi to the owner, and I talked to him, and I thanked him about a lot of history, and we shared a lot of kind personal thoughts. And I says, there's it's a couple months, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary, and he shakes his head. Yeah, he goes, that's my proudest moment as far as gaming here. He goes, when you did that.
That's awesome.
And I says, how about if I come back in 2 months and I repeat it? And I always tell the story when you got that 88-year-old guy who looks down over his glasses at you. He says, Billy, you think you can just walk in here and do a perfect score, do you? And I says, yeah, who do you think you're talking to here? And he laughed and he said, you're welcome here anytime. So to announce that I was going to go there, that I was going to go back there, and I was going to do it on that 4th of July weekend, again, that was a lot of pressure, but I thought, that's what I did in the past. That's what I should be able to do now, and that should speak volumes. So I found myself just continually putting myself back in the position that I was back in the day. Mm-hmm. And I simply had to perform like I did back in the day. So to do that while the investigating and the decision making and all that went on with various groups like Guinness, and not just Guinness, that was a lot of satisfaction. It was satisfying that they investigated, they re-solidified the situation. They could have learned otherwise or said otherwise, right? But to have gone back and done it again, because again, originally it was, he didn't do it because he can't do it. Right.
So when Guinness announced the restoration of your records, it was a video in which you also appeared. And in that video, you stated you see yourself as an ambassador for competitive gaming. So tell us about some of the ways that you are, in your role as an ambassador for competitive gaming, how that works.
Well, when I was in Tokyo on stage in the Tokyo Game Show, and after having spent the time that I spent with Masaya Nakamura, he told me, actually he told the world, that he thought that this event, this perfect score that ran around the world, and I cannot explain or put my thumb on why it happened, why it was so big, why it was so explosive, why I got phone calls and interviews from countries and languages I never even heard of. He said that he thought that event would spark a resurgence in the love of classic gaming. And it was at that time that I thought, as a player, I don't think players get the respect, the recognition, the acknowledgement, the rewards, or anything that they should. These esports athletes should get that just as athletes should. And I didn't want to sit there and play on a competitive level forever. I didn't. I mean, I had a normal life. I had a business and family, and it was my plan. And I did begin going and traveling and seeing and advocate for gamers, to push and promote and bring them recognition in this place that I think they deserve in the gaming world. I mean, when I was a kid, if you went to a game show, a game convention, if you were a gamer, they wouldn't even let you in. And again, that's different now. But so again, wanting to push, promote, and advocate for gamers and their position in the industry is what I did for many years. But I would regularly, for different reasons, get pulled back into the competition at various times. And then I'd say, okay, that's enough. Because you have to sit there and you have to play a game like literally nearly every day in order to inch forward. And I didn't want to do that. So I had long since 2010, I had long since just assumed that role. But let me say, with his prediction in 1999, it was by the year 2000 that film crews started to begin to follow us. At one time, we had as many as 7 film crews following us. The movies began to come out. They began to be made. And barcades and such began to open. And of course, they continue today. So I'd like to take credit for it, but Masaya Nakamura's prediction was correct. And that after 20 years of what we'll call being dormant, the love and passion we all shared as kids, now we're adults, now we can share it as adults.
So one of the ways I've seen you as an ambassador for competitive gaming, I recently saw you on All Elite Wrestling with Miro who used to perform for WWE as Rusev, and he's also a competitive gamer on Twitch. Tell us a little bit about how that all came together.
Well, first of all, they were terrific guys, and I was flattered when they reached out to me. And I think they reached out to me simply because, again, they have a love and passion for gaming, just as you say, for better or worse, depending on which movie you want. I'm seen as the good guy or the bad guy, depending on the movie. And regardless of which one you see, to one degree or another, I've been the face or one of the faces of retro gaming. And I know how to play the part. I know how to go on and mix it up with people like Miro. As a matter of fact, in the filming where I was standing at the Pac-Man, what I wanted to do was walk up as he's playing and say, "Excuse me," like you cut in on a dance.
Yeah.
And I would push him to the side, but he wouldn't go for that because he has his own persona that he puts out. And so therefore I had to just appear to him and kind of have the same attitude he had. But they were terrific to work with. I would do it again in a minute. But when they first contacted me, I thought, is this guy crazy? I'm not going to go in there and get beat to hell. I mean, I'm just not going to do it. I'll forget it. It's not that important. but again, that's not what they had in mind. And it was a lot of fun because what they had in mind when I got there, I mean, was only this big. But as we filmed and had fun, it grew into different scenes throughout the place. And again, that's just a result of the fact that we meshed together so well.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense because, like you kind of alluded to, you have a persona, right? That comes from movies, comes from being a face of retro gaming. But then, you got the person side too, but you're used to kind of playing up a character. I think that's fair, right? So it does totally make sense that you'd fit in perfectly with that world and be able to roll with it. So that's kind of it seems like a natural fit.
Yeah, I thought I would very well, very easily. And again, in their world, they're used to having, protagonists and antagonists and good guys and bad guys and happy guys and less than happy guys. So it was just a matter of which way we fit in the niche. So,
and if you ever do decide to get in the ring, just saying, if you need someone to play like a Weasley manager for you or a sidekick, you've got two guys that can help you out now.
You got it. Absolutely.
So,
I was going to say, with this beard, I think I might be, who's the old WWF guy? Like
you would have some lumberjack thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a theme that could emerge from all this. And Steve,
lumberjack, and you got the right shirt on too.
Yeah. That's right. I could do like the Paul Bunyan thing and have a blue ox come out. I
could do 80s undercover vice cop with my look. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
So, Billy, a theme we have on our show this year is that we as a country are not that far apart politically or culturally as the media and social media in particular makes us feel. As you travel probably more than most people do nowadays, do you find that people are as divided as the media makes us appear?
I actually think that we're far more similar than the media would lead people to believe. I think if the media didn't do so much of what they do, they would become less significant and therefore work against themselves. There are good people in the media. There are. But I have such a other opinion of so much of the media. I think a lot of people simply run with the emotion that they find on the internet. I find that most people who report things, I don't know why they report them, because what they should do is say, "Hi, I'm your copy and paste expert here. I can tell you what such and such a website reported." And again, not everybody is like that. When you think about it, most all of us have a family of some sort. We all want that which is good and beneficial and secure for our families. We all want to move forward and advance our situation and our security in a safe manner. So we have different ideas on how to do that, but basically we have the same goals. They never speak of the fact that we have the same goals. The fact that we have a different outlook on how to get there. One side must be wicked and the other side not.
Right.
Basically, if I read something in the media I don't believe it. I would have to read it from multiple sources, and sometimes sources that come from opposite points of view, and then I would draw a conclusion. The division that exists or appears to exist in society, I believe it will always be there because there's too much money to be made on it. I spent a decade of my life, more than a decade, playing and coaching football in the inner city. And so much of the division that we talk about, it didn't exist.
Right.
Not at all. Not at all. Not one person. 1,000 people in a park. And I couldn't find one person that fit the division or some of the divisions that we're talking about. As far as when you sit there and you watch TV, just an easy subject, racism, it will always exist because there's too much money made off it. It'll always exist. Even if it's non-existent, it will exist. The different animosities between people will always exist. There's too much money to be made on it. There's too much drama. Where there's drama, there's money.
Yeah, I think we can probably agree.
Yeah.
I think all three of us probably agree with what you said.
Right.
What is a misconception about you and or gamers that you'd like to address?
That I'd like to address? None.
Sure. All right.
A misconception. Without a doubt, I realized way back in the 80s, there were, if you took the top 50 gamers, there were extremities. There were guys, I'm thinking of this one guy, I literally, without a joke, I think he was locked in a closet for 10 years. I mean, I felt bad for the guy. He was outrageously introverted. There were guys, I saw a guy do a Rubik's Cube behind his back.
Dang.
I mean, he has to be possessed.
Crazy.
Now, if you took the top 50 players, at least half of them would be literally dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my joke, is that half of them are dysfunctional and the other half of us pretend like we're not, and you believe it. But truth be known, I mean, as I look back on those players, I mean, there's lawyers. There's a guy who worked at the Los Alamos nuclear power facility. Again, people with different issues, like I say, the guy that did the Rubik's Cube behind his back. But without a doubt, I learned all the way back then, they were unquestionably the smartest guys I ever met in my life. I think if it would be one of those guys that would discover time travel or something crazy like that.
Right.
You can take the conception of the typical stereotype of a video game player, and sometimes that stereotype, which is so lousy, I don't even want to describe it, sometimes it's true. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are guys who would, without a doubt, solve the world's problems, without a doubt.
Yeah. I've got a question for you, Billy. So you have mentioned Twitch a couple of times, and we've also talked about sort of you being one of the faces, if not the face, of retro gaming. Have you had anyone, like, are any of the gamers that are doing, I actually don't even know, like Fortnite and some of the other big games, ever reach out to you as an inspiration? Or do you have any sort of relationship with any of the gamers that are doing the new games now?
To answer your question, yes. I make it a point not to be so personally involved that it becomes a major factor in my life because of the other, obviously, factors in my life. But
sure.
I've spoken to them and I've spoken about them. And again, so very often because their level of success that they have, and especially when the level of success that they have is looked down upon.
Right.
And what I mean is to compare somebody in the gaming world, somebody like Ninja.
Mm-hmm.
If I compare him to say Michael Jordan, who I've had conversation with, the amount of sacrifice, the amount of opportunities that Michael Jordan passed up in order to pursue his passion is literally scary. The idea that he could have easily went another direction, maybe a lucrative direction, a successful one, and maybe not. But the idea that everybody was out screwballing while he remained focused. That is no different than what a gamer like Ninja and the sacrifice he makes as an esports gamer. I always say that it's too bad you have one life to live, because people with such dedication and vision, tunnel vision, that they're going to achieve, that they're going to succeed, they only get one shot at life about it. And you take different people. Okay, I mentioned Michael Jordan. How about Michael Jackson? You can argue that you enjoy their passion or you don't. You share it or you don't. But it's hard to argue with the fact that what they do better than anybody in the world.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, you think about like Michael Phelps. How many times did he have to be in that pool when his friends were off doing something else? Michael Jordan shooting free throws while everybody else is doing whatever they're doing.
It's funny, I was going to bring up Michael Phelps, but I said Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, Michael Phelps. I mean, Michael.
Maybe that's why I was thinking of the Michaels as well. Well, a follow-up question to that, if that's okay. So you obviously are in that group. You've spent countless hours on these games. You don't just roll out of bed and get a high score, right? Or a million points in Donkey Kong. And you've done it for so long. You talked a little bit about how you went through that phase where you had to get back in the mindset of, I got to do this all over again. I did it however long ago. What was the primary motivation, and what is the primary motivation to keep you striving and doing the work so that you can achieve these things, as opposed to just saying, hey, I did it and move on?
Well, one problem that I face, it's a positive problem, is going back more than 2 years when we started streaming Twitch. And now I have people say to me, oh, gee, wow, look at everything's wonderful in the world of Guinness. Oh, gee, wow, look, you achieved or re-achieved this score or that score. What are you going to do now? Or are you going to stop? And one of the problems is I play, and because of the world of technology and Twitch, people that I knew for decades that I did not interact with, because I'm not a social media guy. If you think you follow and you interact and you have conversation with me, you're wrong, with the exception of Twitch. Well, I meet them on Twitch, guys going all the way back to 1982, to the birth of esports. Yeah, I see them on Twitch. I'm playing. They come on. They say hi.
Cool. People
that I've met at all these different shows and conventions I've been to, and then people that I've just flat out met and become friendly with because of Twitch. Okay, now I got this group of friends. So what I'm going to do is just, okay, that's fine, and close the laptop. I mean, I'm just not going to do that. I don't really know how to put that into words. I'm just not gonna. Will I streamline it to certain days, certain schedules, because so many other things in my life need attention? Yeah, I'm sure I'll do that. But now, because of the friendships and the relationships that have been formed, I'm just not going to close that door. To go a little closer to what you're saying, is that's one thing that drives me in that direction. But also something that I did when I was a kid that I was just blessed and was so good at. Well, now that I have kids, I can share or enjoy a passion with them that they weren't around for me to enjoy.
Yeah.
I get upset. I don't do well. Oh my God, I disappointed them. I do well, and they go, oh, Dad, I'm proud of you. Yeah, that's something that hits you. It's kind of like, again, your kid's in the youth league. He's out there playing football, and you're there watching, and he's running down the field, and you want to run down the sideline. I mean, you get caught up in the passion. This is something that I can do with them. And fortunately, retro gaming is something that I can do better than him. If I play anything other than retro gaming, he'll squash me. So that's a reason not to play modern games. But I found myself a little over a year ago at the Donkey Kong World Championships. We were down in Australia, and after the first day, you take the top 16 players, like March Madness. I was in second seed. Well, I played 15. He was a friend of mine, and I squashed him. Then there's 8 of us, and I played a guy who was really good, who was ahead of me. Great player at many games. and I won. Well, then I had to face off against my son.
Oh, wow.
Only 4 of us, and I go, that's what this belt is about here. But I said to him, I go, hey, I'll just let you win. Use what? You have to understand. And I go, you can beat these guys. And he gave me the riot act, and we both decided we would try as hard as we could. And so anyway, so I knocked my son out. And so then it was just me against the number 1 seed, who was a great guy who won the year before, and I won. Yeah. It's funny, I say it's things I can interact with my kids, and why I guess even at a greater level than I say, but I think that's a passion that pushes me forward. Mm-hmm. I think I'm just not willing to let go of the past friends, the past relationships, things that not only go to individuals, but go to companies like Namco and Nintendo and Guinness, but also because it's something I can share with my kids. And does that mean that I look 15 or 20 years in the future and I say, gee, I can still be doing this and I can do it with my grandkids? Oh boy, I get tired just thinking of that.
Well, who knows what's going to be happening in video games in 20 years? I can't even imagine. But
you might be in Donkey Kong at that point.
Yeah.
Well, I have people say to me, they go, when you started this at your first event in 1982, could you ever imagine it being at this point? I mean, absolutely not. So when I sit there and if I fast forward, 30 years, yeah, it's incredible. I have no idea what video games could be like. You might be more like Star Trek, and you're transported and you're fighting for your life, somewhere. So
what could go wrong?
Yeah.
So do you have any advice for someone who wants to seriously engage in competitive gaming or esports?
Yeah, stay in school.
But always good advice.
Yeah, but on a serious note, it's like, for example, my son, he graduated high school in 2017. He was a nationally ranked athlete. He was the number 7 ranked receiver in the country. And he was the number 2 ranked kicker in the country.
Wow.
But he had a grade point average that could absolutely choke a horse. And when he finished high school and he went onward, although he played football, it was not his passion. It wasn't what he wanted to do for his whole life. Mm-hmm. And without that education background, he would not have had a choice. There were some guys that were at least as good as him and with the same opportunities. I'm thinking of this one guy. He's a great guy. I mean, he's beyond a gifted athlete, and he didn't have the same backup plan as my son. And now he works. Now he works in a garage fixing cars, which is fine. But that is not what he envisioned. Right. He thought he was going to rule the world. And had he taken his education as seriously as he did his athletics, he would still rule the world. To have that skill set and be able to push it aside or walk away for something you think you would enjoy more, man, that's tremendous freedom. Yeah. So if someone has this passion, if someone wants to be this good, to take that energy that you have, that passion you have, and have it spill over into every aspect of your life. I mean, the personal satisfaction for the person you are and try that hard, personal satisfaction for the education or training that you strive to be in, that you really try that hard, just as hard as you try in the world of gaming. I mean, the world will be yours.
It's great advice.
It's good advice. So what is next for Billy Mitchell? Where do you want people to find you, to find out what you're doing?
Well, what's next? I still haven't been to Namco for the Pac-Man birthday party. Hopefully next month. I had promised them that I had a lot of fun things planned, and I did. We did some perfect scores in some events this year for Pac-Man. Well, next year is Miss Pac-Man's 40th birthday. Cool. So that'll be a good thing. Everything seems to get delayed because of the problems of the world, but that's what's next year. Also next year, I'm supposed to go back to Japan. If I do, that's great. And if I don't go back next year, it would just be the year after. What's really awesome now is, okay, so I have kids, and when I went to an event, you guys say you've seen the movie. Well, in the movie, there's a point where my wife says, oh, I don't know. She says, I've never seen Bill play video games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
It's true. She didn't, because I would run off to these events and she'd be here wrestling with the kids like you're supposed to. So what she said was true. It was taken out of context, and we had a lot of fun with the drama and the movie and entertainment. But now that our youngest is 22, she travels with me. So when I get a invitation and an agreement to go to Europe, like we're supposed to go to Amsterdam, that's terrific. Part of the agreement is always 2 tickets. So we take and we make it a life experience. Wherever we go now, we go together. We'll go to Japan together, or we're going to go to Amsterdam. Supposed to go to London. Again, now it's a life experience. So it's a greater level of satisfaction. Before I would run away and come back home and hope the kids hadn't, run her out of the house. But
Right.
so yeah, that's what to expect. And again, that's such a level of satisfaction. It truly is. You'll go somewhere. It's a life experience. Sure, you go there, you're there at the event, you do your job, but then you spend a week screwing around, and that's priceless, with the ones you love.
Absolutely. Business travel where you get to do what you love to do and you're with the people you love. That's top of the world. So,
And Billy, your Twitch link is Twitch TV Billy_Mitchell.
Yes.
All right.
great. Well, this has been awesome,
Yeah.
Billy. Thank you so much for the candor and the thoughtful answers.
Yeah, we
And
appreciate
it's a
it.
thrill for us.
Okay, very good.
And remember that wrestling offer too.
Yeah.
We're there to support you.
You betcha.
All right. Well, there it was, our interview with video game great and world record holder Billy Mitchell. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and we really appreciate Billy coming on the show. We also really appreciate you, and want to remind you that you can call us and leave us a voicemail at 804-621-5803. Let us know if you have a topic you want us to cover, or if you just want to compliment Steve's bandana, or anything else you have on your mind. We'd love to hear it. So with that said, we want to once again thank you. And by the way, don't forget, we do have a Patreon, and there's all sorts of great content there, as well as seeing both of our beautiful beards at patreon.com/speaksies. And with that, I will say, Bob's your uncle.
Watch out for bears, and kale is from the devil.
Speaksies.